why is this population more vulnerable? Why are they getting lymphoma at an earlier age? And what are the different elements that can influence that, that's unique to that region?
This is the James Cancer-Free World podcast. I'm Steve Wartenberg, and my guest is Dr. Robert Baiocchi. Rob is a medical oncologist who specializes in treating patients with blood cancers, and his research focuses on studying aggressive lymphomas and post-transplant complications. Rob is also one of the leaders of the James Global One Health Initiative, and he is leading this outreach program in Ethiopia. Rob will fill us in on this exciting project, which has been going on for a few years in Ethiopia, and how it's saving lives thousands of miles away from Columbus, and why this type of outreach is important. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to learn about this. I don't know anything about this program, so what is the Global One Health Initiative?
So Global One Health Initiative, and also known as GOHi, easier to say. It's really a OSU-led consortium of faculty, business leaders, government leaders, university leaders from across really all the colleges of OSU and also across the world. And GOHi is focused on improving human health by focusing on agriculture, livestock, water, health, and how this relates to human health. So also focuses on other initiatives like, antibiotic resistance, why certain populations of patients get cancer, and really studying population dynamics and, how we can, find areas to address and really focus our science and our medicine on.
So within this bigger picture and bigger projects of all areas of medicine and related to medicine is cancer. Mm-hmm. And that's the part you're involved in.
Right.
So kind of fill us in on that, how it got started and what you're doing.
So really how GOHi started was to focus on initially communicable diseases like infectious agents and how certain antibiotics resistance develops. But the more work recently has focused on non-communicable diseases like cancer. Cancer is a leading cause of death in developing nations and across the entire world. And there's a lot of unanswered questions as to why certain populations of patients are more vulnerable than others. And so Global One has really directed focus on both scientists and, bringing clinicians in, public health people, very comprehensive group that focuses on the cancer problem.
So you say that certain populations are more likely to get cancer. Are there certain populations that get certain types of cancers in certain parts of the world, or is it more widespread or harder to kind of pin that down?
Yeah, so I think a perfect example is one of the diseases that we focus on, which is called lymphoma. Lymphoma is a cancer of the white blood cell system, our lymphocytes. And there are several populations in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where infections kind of come together and create a lymphoma. So best example are children in malaria endemic regions. The most common cause of cancer in children in Africa is Burkitt's lymphoma, and it's caused by a co-infection of Epstein-Barr virus and malaria. And these kids develop these lymphomas, in fact, in their jaw. They're real dramatic presentations, and their outcomes are terrible at very early ages, before the age of 5.
Wow.
And this is something that was discovered decades ago, and this is how the first cancer-causing virus, Epstein-Barr, was discovered. So that's a great example of a population that's vulnerable. Everyone gets malaria, everyone gets EBV, and then this common lymphoma is endemic to that region.
Well, I know I believe there's is there a vaccine against malaria, but not against Epstein-Barr?
So there's a vaccine to malaria and Epstein-Barr. So those are two areas we're working on, actually, in the lab that we can talk about. In fact, one of our projects we just submitted to the NIH is focused on vaccinating children for malaria to see if that impacts the outcome of what that does to the virus, EBV, and what that does to lymphoma risk. And that's under review now, so we'll see.
Wow, so you identified a problem that in Africa, in certain regions of Africa, the combination of malaria and Epstein-Barr, EBV, causes lymphoma. So once you identify that problem, how did that get folded into this, GOHi?
So let's maybe go back and start, just describe when I got involved here.
Yeah.
This goes back to, so GOHi has had a great presence with our College of Medicine for a long time. Dr. Lockwood, years ago in 2012, I think, visited with GOHi, Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. He was a big supporter of global health, as is our current dean, Dr. Bradford, which is really exciting. But back then, Wandasen Gabriels, who's the leader of GOHi, he was interested in incorporating cancer into their field of study, into their overall effort. And at the time he and I first met, the Cancer Center, the James Cancer Center, had a pilot grant available to fund people who were interested in studying AIDS-related cancers in low-middle-income countries. And so that's exactly what my clinical and laboratory program is on, is immune deficiency in cancer. It's what Wandasen does in GOHi. We just happened to meet, this opportunity presented itself, we wrote the grant, and we got it. And that started our collaboration back in 2015. And after that, then, we used those funds from the Cancer Center to actually take our laboratory team, travel to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia at the university, and open the first laboratory to study viruses, how they cause cancer, and the immunology of these viruses. And that's how we kicked this whole thing off. And it's been a real exciting program because not only have our graduate students and postdocs and faculty like me benefited from this, the graduate students and faculty in Ethiopia have been full partners, and we've graduated PhDs from there and everything. It's turned out to be a really mutual, beneficial relationship. It's been really cool. In Addis Ababa, we've been very fortunate to have Wandasen's team really forge the way for us. And it's just been, they lack infrastructure, and that's why we built the lab. We have other new initiatives to help infrastructure there with the Ethiopian Ministry of Health. Even cell therapy we're working on bringing there. And so, there's what you see is opportunity in every corner, and you see need really in every corner. So it's really the perfect partnership to kindle and keep going.
It seems like doctors, when they see a need anywhere in the world, they want to help. What is it in you doctors that makes you want to do that?
It's why we went to medical school in the first place, right? I initially started out as a PhD scientist, and my mentor, Mike Caligiuri, would bring me on rounds, and I would see these people who were just incredibly sick and developing cancers after their transplants. And first of all, it's an interesting scientific problem, but when you look at a patient struggling and dealing with not just their transplant being at risk and their life being at risk, but now they have cancer. And it just triggers something in you that just makes you makes you motivated, go back to the lab, write your clinical trials, develop your vaccines, do everything you can, because, while there's only 24 hours a day, we could go continuously and still just make little dents in the road along the way, but they're all meaningful. So, it's why you choose to go into a field of study that just gets you going.
Okay, that was a great overview on the history of it, and we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, you'll fill us in on exactly what you're doing in Ethiopia.
The best outcomes for treating cancer come from early detection and early diagnosis.
The James Cancer Diagnostic Center at Ohio State
is designed to provide rapid evaluation and a clear diagnosis.
We are transforming care by giving patients direct access
to cancer experts who study and treat cancer every day.
If you think you have cancer, the choice is clear. choose the James Cancer Diagnostic Center.
We're back with Rob Baiocchi, and let's travel over to Ethiopia. Take us over there and fill us in on what you're doing exactly.
So the one problem that we're very interested in addressing and focusing on is, why is lymphoma a common disease in sub-Saharan Africa? Why is, and what are the vulnerabilities? What drive the disease?
When you say it's common there, how common is it?
So if you look at what lymphoma, how common lymphoma is here, it's about the 10th cause of cancer.
10th
right?
leading cause of
leading
cancer.
cause
Yeah.
of cancer in the United States, in developed nations or Western nations. When you look at sub-Saharan Africa, it's the number 2 cause of cancer in men, number 4 or 5 in women. They are aggressive, high-grade B-cell lymphomas for the most part. They also afflict younger people. And so we're interested in that question. Why? Is this population more vulnerable? Why are they getting lymphoma at an earlier age? And what are the different elements that can influence that, that's unique to that region?
So you already asked my question, why? What do you know why, or is
We're-
that what you're learning
We're
now?
kind of zeroing in on a couple of really interesting findings. So there's a host side, which is the person, and then there's these infections, okay, which are the microbes or the viruses, okay? I already talked a little bit about children getting malaria and EBV and how that kind of forms a perfect storm to drive lymphoma in a young population. We think also a vulnerability in adults is having these viruses for decades. Like when people get infected with EBV here in the States, it happens in their teens and 20s. And, EBV-driven cancers are not a big deal here, okay? I mean, they're still relevant and they still cause problems, but people are infected with EBV at the age of 1, okay? Wow. And not just EBV. There's other herpes viruses, like human herpes virus 8, that also causes cancer. And this chronic exposure of these infections, okay? There's also other infections, like bacterial, parasitic infections that are in the water, and we don't see that here. But it's a huge potential variable present in that region. So infection, inflammation, perhaps immune deficiency, maybe host genomic variables. That's what we're interested in studying, all of those areas.
So I'm going to make sure I understand this correctly. Here in the United States, a person might first be infected in their 20s and 30s, and it doesn't show up until their 60s or 70s. In Africa and Ethiopia, they could be infected at the age of 1, so it's going to again show up 10 or 15 years later or sooner,
right? And
even perhaps more powerful, the disease.
Right. Exactly. So, now, yes, there are these vulnerabilities, or not vulnerabilities, but differences, say, in the genomic makeup of Western white people as compared to African black populations. And we know that that's an important contributing factor to outcomes in lymphoma and leukemia, and that's been studied here at Ohio State, actually, by Dr. Eisfeld's group. My group is getting into this now. But the host side is becoming a very important area of research, just because
host means the person,
the person's own genetic makeup. There are genetic mutational findings in leukemia that portend or drive a great prognosis for white patients with acute myeloid leukemia or lymphoma. But that same mutational profile in a black patient codes for a horrible outcome, and no one really understands why that is. And it's one of the reasons we need diverse enrollment on clinical trials, because this was missed until recently. And Dr. Eisfeld really has become a pioneer in this area. Now, on the other side, on the virus side or the infection side, we've made the observation that EBV and malarial co-infection drive Burkitt's lymphoma, but also EBV, the virus that infects more than 90% of humans worldwide, is very different in different regions, okay? So the dogma or the textbook definition of EBV is that it's the same virus everywhere. It's not. We just did a study in Central and South America where we found several brand new strains of EBV that didn't look like any other regional EBV. In fact, it looked more like EBV in Polynesia, which is where those humans migrated from thousands of years ago, than it did in North America. In Africa, we've discovered up to 9 to 10 new variants, and a lot of these genomic variants of the virus are super cancer causers. Like they drive oncogenesis or cancer much more rapidly, which is a brand new area of research. In fact, we presented this idea to a viral oncology community, and they didn't like it because it was so different. But the virus has, variation at the genomic level that really can influence population vulnerabilities to cancer, to lymphoma especially.
So it sounds like understanding from a genetic level what causes it can help lead to prevention and better treatment.
So the prevention side, so you brought up vaccines earlier, okay? And yes, we're working on a vaccine with malaria to look at outcomes in Burkitt's children. But also we've developed one of the first EBV vaccines to prevent EBV-driven cancers.
Oh, okay.
Now, we're using that vaccine here at Ohio State. This is a vaccine that was developed by us a decade ago, and it's entering trial, literally just was opened here at Ohio State, and it's meant to vaccinate patients who are awaiting solid organ transplants because they're the vulnerable population in a developed world. In Africa, we would have this vision of vaccinating vulnerable populations there, like HIV-positive patients. What does our studies tell us? Well, the virus that's present here in North America is completely different than what's in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, if we use the vaccine that we're rolling out here in the States over in Africa, it would be invisible. Nobody would respond to it. So this is important that we understand the genetic makeup of EBV, viruses like EBV, because that's how we can develop a vaccine that will impact that region's people. That's a prevention strategy.
So you have a vaccine here that's ready for clinical trials. Over there, you're not that far ahead yet.
No, but we've already sequenced over 500 EBV genomes in Malawi, Ethiopia, and Uganda, okay? And we have compared the EBV sequences to the other regional viruses that are published, and they're all the same 9, 10 variants, but they're all unique to sub-Saharan Africa. So we can use that information to formulate a vaccine that's going to be super immunogenic. It's going to drive immunity and protect against lymphoma and specific populations that are vulnerable.
Wow. Okay. So you're in the midst of that research, and then hopefully within a couple of years, clinical trials, and then full vaccines. So you'll have a vaccine for Epstein-Barr and for malaria, which, knock on wood, can drive down rates tremendously.
So the first step for us would be to work with our partner university in Oregon. Okay, this is one of our collaborators who's actually leading the effort with the malaria vaccine in Kenya. That's the first step, and if we can vaccinate against malaria and then see what the differences are with EBV infection and how the host handles that, and ultimately what are the outcomes for lymphoma, that's our first step. If it doesn't prevent lymphoma, then we have the EBV vaccine, and we can come in and vaccinate with both and see if we can prevent this.
Okay.
So that would be the ultimate goal.
If to see if the combination works better than individual.
Right.
Okay, so that's excellent, and I think I do understand what you're doing on the prevention and vaccine side. How about on the treatment of people who have already been diagnosed with lymphoma over there?
Sure. So first of all, patients who get lymphoma in resource-limited settings, virtually all of sub-Saharan Africa, they don't get the standard therapy. Okay, standard therapy is treatment with an antibody called rituximab and a combination chemotherapy called CHOP. And the outcomes here with patients with these types of lymphomas are generally pretty good. People respond well. They have a good complete response rate. Patients who have resistant disease can have access to clinical trials and more advanced or more intensive chemotherapies, even stem cell transplant. And so the outcomes of our lymphoma patients in the United States and other Western nations are very good. There, a minority of patients will get rituximab. They'll get single-agent chemotherapy. Sometimes they will get CHOP. But the outcomes are much, much worse.
Because they're not getting all these different treatments.
They're not getting the ideal, which is called standard of care treatment.
It's just not available there yet?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just the money's not there for the governments to buy the rituximab and to buy all these drugs. So there's a huge need for new therapies. Okay, so one of the areas we're interested in is looking at not non-chemotherapy ways to treat lymphoma, okay? These are ways where you could provide a small molecule, okay, and give it to patients and either prevent the disease if they're vulnerable populations, or if they have the disease, use a combination of oral agents to effectively treat it. So we have focused on a target that we discovered here at Ohio State as an oncogene in not just EBV-driven lymphomas, but all lymphomas, all leukemias, solid tumors as well. And we developed the first-in-class drug to target this protein called PRMT5, and actually was licensed out. It was all developed here at the Cancer Center. And we're interested in taking this drug forward into clinical trials in combination with other agents and offering this to patient populations in sub-Saharan Africa. This is something we could envision in the next several years.
Well, let me make sure I understand this. The protein you mentioned is a protein that's that's the cancer cells possess, and you've identified it, and then you create an immunotherapy drug that
a targeted agent.
That lets the immune system see it better and attack it.
Right. So the protein's in every cell of the body. It's just shut off. It's active and working in embryos. It's during embryogenesis that this protein works. And cancer has found a way to exploit that protein and make it overexpressed and make it drive multiple areas of cell signaling and gene expression, pro-survival signals. And when you hit that one protein with this targeted agent we developed, and then with industry made it better, it's a great target and it's a great drug. And in phase 1, it's led to several complete responses in patients with gliomas, aggressive brain tumors. We are interested in the area of viral oncology, how the viruses drive cancer, because it's needed. This protein's needed for the virus to kick off cancer. So, we're looking at pathways. So some of the genetic variants of the virus that we've discovered actually drive this pathway 1,000-fold higher.
That protein.
And it makes it even more vulnerable to the inhibitor. So that's where the genetics and the treatment kind of comes in.
So Ohio State and this program, and you've gotten grants to pay for it, but it's not unlimited. So you can't just bring standard of care there. So you're coming up with a creative solution that sounds like it could help not only there in Ethiopia, but here as well, because you're creating a new standard of care.
That might be safer and might be better tolerated.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other environmental factors that are present in sub-Saharan Africa that are absent in Western cultures. So, for example, tuberculosis is a huge problem. HIV is a huge problem. Still, it's the largest population, global population of HIV is in sub-Saharan Africa. And we all know that these patients who have these different co-infections have worse outcomes because when they get chemo, they get immune suppressed, these infections blossom, and they don't do well. So going after non-chemo ways of treating patients will be very attractive.
Wow, that's fascinating that you had a standard of care here that was effective. You needed to come up with a new standard of care.
Well, that's not yet.
Well, you're trying to, yes, of course.
Yeah, it's a good goal to shoot for.
But it's just fascinating that you did this and that this could also be applied elsewhere all over the world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is a great example of why, global research is important. If you look at our makeup of our country, we are a collection of different, backgrounds, and it's important to understand those backgrounds. For example, patients in the United States who have lymphoma, those patients who have African ancestry have a really dismal outcome. And it's interesting because they also have a very unique genomic makeup, mutational landscape that looks like leukemia, actually, acute myeloid leukemia. But yeah, I mean, the impact is that you can make these discoveries that can reach across, countries and make impacts, but also lead to discoveries that happen here that might be more impactful in a different region of the world and really benefit people outside the U.S., which is still benefiting people.
So this has been fascinating, and the one thing that you've said that really, I think, hit me is that you're not just helping people in Ethiopia or anywhere you're doing GOHi goes. This global cooperation helps everybody, it seems, and including patients here. It leads to so many breakthroughs.
Yeah, I mean, I think organizations like Global One or GOHi, the important, I think, comment to make is that they're mutually beneficial organizations. They drive discovery at home. They drive development of new ways to treat disease or ways to treat disease in a much less expensive fashion. Provide educational opportunities for our own students.
Yeah.
And clinicians, really the discovery that's being made from the populations in other regions, low middle income countries, can teach us a lot about the people at our own home, right, who are from those areas. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship that really is needed now more than ever. One last example I'd like to maybe bring up is this recent effort. Everyone hears about cell therapy and how cell therapy is, this next giant breakthrough, and it has been made a huge impact on patients with resistant lymphomas, for example. The idea of doing this in a low middle income country was just completely out of bounds. Each product is hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop and to deliver. But people like Marcos de Lima here have figured out ways to do this much less expensive, and actually has a project in Brazil where they're rolling this out, bringing cell therapy to Brazil.
He did talk about this on the podcast, and they're creating a facility there.
Right.
Again,
and
a big box facility, yeah.
We're at the beginning stages of doing this at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia.
And again, cellular therapy is taking the T cells out, genetically re-engineering them so they're more powerful to fight cancer, putting them back in the person.
Right.
So you're creating that in Ethiopia.
It's happening in Brazil, and it's going to happen in Ethiopia, we hope. We're at the beginning stages of pitching the idea. But, think about the impact that would make.
Yeah.
Think of the percentage of patients there with lymphoma, one of the more common causes of cancer, who get a subactive treatment, who develop resistant disease. They have no options. To be able to roll out a cell therapy program where they can come in, get a dose of cells, and even if 50% of patients benefit, think of the impact that could make. And these countries now are very interested in building their infrastructure and modernizing their healthcare delivery systems. And this is going to be the next several decades of development in these low middle income countries like Ethiopia, where this will become a reality. And it would be wonderful just to see OSU as the partner that brings that forward and kind of just breaks that out. That would be super cool.
Yeah, I can see the look on your face when you started talking about it was a look of like passion and determination, and I have a feeling you're going to make sure this gets done.
We will do our best. For sure.
That's all you can do. Well, thank you. This has been really fascinating, and congratulations on all the work you've done and continued success in Ethiopia and beyond.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate you inviting me on today, and this has been fun. And yeah, thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio State University Comprehensive Cancer Center, Arthur G. James Cancer Hospital, and Richard J. Solove Research Institute. For more information, check out our website, cancer.osu.edu.